Hello and welcome back to the studio. In our final Q&A, we're going to be reflecting on what's been discussed and announced at this year's PRI in person and the progress made. And to join me in the studio to discuss this, we have Barbara Zvan, President and CEO of the University Pension Plan Ontario, Cambria Alan Ratzlaff, PRI's Chief RI Ecosystems Officer, Lindsey Walton, Director for Americas for PRI, and Renato Tucci, Head of Beta Strategies and ESG Integration for Itaú Asset Management. Thank you so much for joining us all on the last day. We want to start by talking a bit about Canada. So Barb and Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start by asking, what has it meant to you that we're back for PRI in person in Canada after a decade? Barb, do you want to start?
Sure, it's great to see PRI back. I think it's especially important because there's such movement on so many important things, both here in Canada and globally, on things like taxonomies and disclosures. We have had great conversations on those here. I think it recognizes that Canadians are perhaps important players in the global financial scene. And I think it's especially nice, having Canadians and talking with their international peers and sharing their insights. I think that is probably the best part.
Lindsey?
Yeah, it's been really exciting because of the great team we have in Canada, the great team we have at the PRI, but also the local champions that we have around responsible investment and the PRI's work, like Barb Zvan, like Jane Ambachir at BNP, and many others who started as soon as we announced PRI was coming to Toronto, started coming to us saying, we've got to make the most of this. Look at what happened in Japan. There were so many amazing announcements. How can we make this be a catalyst for Canada? And that led us to create the first ever local action forum, which Barb was a part of. And that was a group of mostly Canadian, but some broader Americas folks. And we met with them, once a month and went through different types of announceables. So what can we say, what can we use PRI in person as the carrot for? So PRI in person is coming, what are you going to say? This is what happened last year. And then the announceables snowballed. And everyone was thinking, well, I better get an announceable too, because everyone's having them. And so that and lots of policy conversations over the last year has, and lots of work that Barb, the SFAC, of course, in the her work in the expert panel have done over the past 4 years, have led to some announcements that we saw yesterday.
Could you talk
Deputy
a bit about those announcements?
Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. I'm going to let Barb speak to those because Barb has been driving those very, very well for a number of years. So I'll let Barb speak to those, but that's been the most exciting part of this whole experience.
So I guess I'll take my key takeaways perhaps or key things that were really exciting. So I think if I go from small to big, the small, I think, and Lindsey can talk more about this, Climate Engagement Canada, which is the investor company dialogue focused on Canada. So it really takes the best of Climate Action 100 plus, and it focuses on Canada's top emitters. It's about 40 of them. And we increased international supporter participants, which is fantastic. And really want to thank PRI for being also one of the groups that really helped move that initiative forward. I think yesterday's big announcement was with Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Freeland, and she announced the Canadian Green and Transition Taxonomy based off work that we did at the Sustainable Finance Action Council, as well as mandatory disclosure for the federally regulated private companies, which is within the jurisdiction of the federal government. So really exciting wins for both the economy and climate. And I think it's a really strong signal that Canada is serious about attracting their share of climate finance. And so putting those key infrastructures in place. I would say it's also a personal highlight because I had an opportunity to lead that group, and it made me reflect on David Atkin's opening comments a few days ago when we go further when we travel together. And for folks who may not know, SFAC, or Sustainable Finance Action Council, started in 2021. It ended earlier this year. And there was so many folks involved. There was the 25 largest financial institutions in Canada, probably over 90% of the financial industry in Canada. And we had really dedicated and senior level members on the actual council, so CEOs or those who reported into the CEOs. We had technical expert groups across the 4 mandate areas. We had dedicated people from the official sector, from the main prudential regulator, OSFI, as well as Bank of Canada. And then within government, I don't think there was a bigger supporter than MP Ryan Turnbull, who was part of the announcement yesterday. And the environmental non-government organizations were also supporting our work. So taking all that together, the taxonomy, disclosure, the investor company engagement, I think we're moving the dial in Canada and actually showing that we're going to have worthy projects to invest in here.
Amazing, and amazing to have so many great announcements happening here at PRI in person. We did broadcast live Chrystia Freeland's talk last night, her announcement, but if you missed it, it's available to watch on demand. I highly recommend you go back and watch that. It was fantastic. Aid, coming to you, taking a more global lens, what do you think were the most noteworthy announcements made this week for the global RI community?
Yeah, so thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to come back to PRI in person. It's such a great event when you can learn a lot of things, especially in a dynamic agenda like responsible investment. So taking this into consideration, I would like to highlight 3 major announcements, right? So first of all, the new policy research paper to support engagement with policymakers on social issues related to transition. It's a very special topic. It's very unique lens to how better structure the transition, taking into consideration all the social aspects that it will impact, right? Communities, so it's very important, this new paper. Second, the announcement of the supplemental guidance to incorporate nature into the transition plan. I really think that the more we talk about the nature, biodiversity, right, we know how difficult it is to incorporate this in investments. So it's always helpful to have such a guidance, right? And third, the consultation of index strategies to better understand how all these kind of investments can support the transition. I really think that it's important taking into consideration how big is the index strategies nowadays.
Fantastic, and that theme of incorporating biodiversity has come up a lot in our discussions here in the live studio, and it's great to have it talked about. Thank you so much. So Cambria, let's talk about the theme of this year's PRI in person, progressing global action on responsible investment. The conference isn't quite over yet, but if you reflect on it so far, beyond commitments, has this year's PRI in person facilitated conversations on progress and action?
Absolutely. I think you're hearing it from Ede and Barb and Lindsey, what PRI does in bringing the global community together to really work on some of these thorny issues, but to supercharge responsible investment and move us forward. So I might share a few takeaways from this event. So first, the value and power of convening. I think Mark Carney said it best yesterday, that PRI is helping to empower long-term returns to beneficiaries. And that's by pulling everyone together and making sure that we are working as a community. PRI has the extraordinary ability to convene on a global scale, but also you're hearing the local experience and how powerful that was to have that sort of firepower behind all of that we've seen in Canada this week. Second, what's global is local, and what's local is global. So we see that in a lot of the great work happening in the emerging markets and bringing that perspective into PRI and helping to find ways to catalyze capital from developed countries to our developing and emerging economies. 3, government can be an enabler. We saw that this week, yesterday in Canada, but it also can sometimes stand in the way. And really, it's important for us to continue to engage governments around the world in the markets that we function in, and that's something that we really try to do in PRI. We are in the middle of a global election cycle, so the elephant in the room, of course, is we have an election coming up in my home country of the U.S. Next month. And, in that election, we'll see 2 different views of the future. But regardless of what happens, the other takeaway is that investors are moving forward anyway. We've seen, this is not kind of your mom's pension fund work. We're seeing a lot of creativity in asset allocation, in transition finance, in blended finance. And the conversations that have been happening, not just in the plenaries, but also around the margins, have been really, really powerful in kind of pulling those pieces together. We also celebrated those innovations through our PRI award ceremony a couple nights ago, where we highlighted innovation in climate and nature, in convening, and in emerging markets and also private markets, recognizing the absolute power and opportunity we have there. System risks also can't be diversified away. And that's, I think, an important theme for investors to continue to think about. And then also just it's critical that we have an inclusive and just transition, understanding that, when Barb echoes David's words of, we go further when we travel together, that means everyone together. And the just transition work that we've done, that Eid pointed out, has been really, I think, critical in harnessing that important message. So those are my thoughts.
So many amazing takeaways. Lindsey, what are your takeaways from being here?
I have some takeaways, but I'm also going to follow up on some announcements that I forgot to mention in my excitement to get to the taxonomy announcement. So in the announceables that snowballed towards PRI in person, we did see a couple things happen from Climate Engagement Canada, which is Canada's local version of Climate Action 100 Plus. And just as a side note, CEC is a really successful and I believe the first local version of a global collaborative initiative like this. I had the pleasure of being on the inaugural steering committee with Barb, and personally I felt that the governance would make or break this, and we got the governance right. We did a great job. We have an excellent model. So if people want to know more about that, give us a ping.
We're looking for more international support.
Yeah, and we're looking for more international support.
Let's advertise here.
And on that note, we did have a few that joined just recently, and all of these announcements, I can't say PRI in person was the exact reason that these things happened, but its timing is suspect. I think it might have been the reason, but I can't claim attribution 100%. So the new joiners, Pictet, GMO, BNP, Railpen, I believe it's $1 trillion that we added to the initiative in assets under management. I mean, just huge news. This initiative has grown so much since 2021. We also have an interesting grant funding program, so for $50K over 2 years. And what this grant funding is doing is looking at the 40 focus companies, seeing who hasn't taken this really renowned ICD, Institute of Corporate Directors, climate course for board members, for corporate directors, and funding one corporate director from those companies to take these courses, because the education at the board level is so key to get that top-down championing for climate action and sustainability broadly. Two more things that PRI in person is going to take credit for through me right now. So we had a lot of green bond issuances. So we worked with CIBC, we worked with CBI and the Local Action Council to try and just say, let's get the word out. PRI in person is coming. If you happen to have a green bond announcement and you want to make it around this time, it would be great for us to highlight. So we did see yesterday, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland announced $2 billion in green bonds from the Canadian federal government. Last week, we saw $1 billion in green bonds from the Ontario government. And we're doing all three levels of government here. So Toronto, municipal government as well, issued $200 million in social bonds.
Wow.
So that's a lot of money. And then the last announcement I have is the Institute for Sustainable Finance that we work very closely with. They issued a really amazing inaugural report that they haven't issued before about the Canadian sustainability bond market. So they looked at the past decade of issuances and analyzed a lot of trends, but notably the massive growth in that area. And to not hog the conversation too much, I will move on to some key takeaways.
Please do.
I will. I only have two because Cambria covered so many so well. I really loved and wrote down a quote from Tiffany Reeves where she said, fiduciary duty means different things to different types of investors in different contexts and different jurisdictions. And, we talk about fiduciary duty and everybody argues about what it means and doesn't mean. And that is simple and obvious, but I don't think that is nuanced or called out in the conversation enough. So I'm going to take that back with me. And then we had some excellent engagement around our progression pathways co-design that the PRI is still working on. So the session started with signatories just highlighting why they joined the PRI to begin with. A lot of them talked about how the use of the PRI data and reporting framework was an enabler for them to really professionalize the work that they were doing and understand what their peers were doing. So, it's been very fit for purpose for a very long time. As we continue with the co-design of progression pathways, there's been a lot of conversation, and that will continue around diverging signatory needs and wants. So things like flexibility versus complexity, tailored responses versus comparable indicators, and optionality versus inconsistent responses. So lots to do, lots of challenge, but the conversations are rich and they're happening, and we will continue to work with signatories to co-design.
Well, thank you so much. And isn't it great to just celebrate so much action in line with the theme, so much progress, so many wonderful developments happening. And I think we should take credit. Let's just say they happened all because
it was all us.
Because of PRI in person 2024. No one's in the studio to correct us. Aid, how about you? What are your main takeaways?
Yeah, let me build something on what she said. It's clear that responsible investment is not one size fits all. It's very important to take into consideration the regional scene, the local demands, and build onto that to move in a structured way forward, right? Another thing, it's about action, right? Let's start complaining about the data. Of course, that we can, here and then have more accuracy data, but let's figure out how we can use what we have, right? Another thing is to really integrate the ESG into your investment process to track the transition. I really think that we are in a transition. That's the right word, the right way, but we must track, right? Because it's a kind of dangerous word, because as you can, transition, right? But how long it will take? That's the dangers, right? So that's my three considerations into this.
Thank you so much, Bob. We've heard a lot of takeaways. I'm sure yours
I'll try to
overlap,
add
but what are
to
yours?
that versus, so I won't repeat. But maybe my first takeaway that's unique is that I think the industry is just having a much more mature conversation now, right? So we have a strong focus on value creation and the efforts that are needed and different ways that we can demonstrate the impact. So I think that was really good to see more, for example, more systems level thinking, right, is a really good example of that the financial system, the environmental and the social, they're all connected. And so we have to take a much more systemic approach to the solutions. And one that I really enjoyed this morning was the dialogue between investors and the Canadian federal government. And that really shows the evolution of engagement. We started with companies, individual companies, and we're now moving up to governments because we all recognize that policy is so key. And my experience between the expert panel and the Action Council, the benefit of having the dialogue between those two groups and sharing what's really important to you and how you see it, and listening to them and what their challenges are, and you really start bringing more solutions together. And I think that was one of the takeaways for me this morning. That was
amazing.
fantastic.
And it's, it's one of the reasons we're all here is because of the fantastic conversations that happen at PRI in person that might not happen otherwise. So it's fantastic.
Yeah.
We want to finish on a light note. I mean, it's been an incredibly positive event, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And Barb, again, coming back to you, what's been your favourite memory from PRI in person 2024?
Well, one, of course, welcoming so many global peers to the City of Toronto, but with a tangible announcement from Deputy Prime Minister Freeland on the taxonomy and disclosure. I think it will shape Canada and the global sustainable finance landscape for years to come, especially with that transition element. And then last night we had a sold-out side event by the Institute of Sustainable Finance and the Canadian Climate Law Initiative. And so many of the attendees reminded us to just stop and enjoy the moment and celebrate this achievement. And then they said, get back to work. So we still have a lot to do. And then I think the best was, on my phone, I got a text from my 20-year-old daughter, and I'm going to read it. It said, this will have big impacts and honestly save mine and the next generation. So that was really
that's
nice
so
for me.
sweet.
So-
Oh, thank you so much. Cambria.
Oh man, there were so many great moments. But one of my highlights was we had an Oxford-style debate yesterday, our final session yesterday, where we debated essentially whether sort of a corporate-focused, market-based solution was more effective versus kind of going through government-based solutions to be able to enable responsible investment and responsible finance. And the kind of the private markets piece came out slightly on top, but I think there was just a strong recognition that it's important to ensure that we have these critical enablers and that government policymakers have a absolutely critical role in moving us forward. So that was a cool one for me. I hope we do more of those in the future.
Absolutely. Lindsay.
I took the instruction to use the lighter note, and so I have a couple, and I'm glad they weren't mentioned because I thought, oh no, I'm going third. All mine are going to be taken, but mine weren't. So I did think it beyond the taxonomy announcement, which was I was shaking in my seat over. DPM Chrystia Freeland, her mention of riding her bike. was a highlight for me, and then it was hilarious when she noted her team took a car who are younger than her. So I thought that was a lighter note and quite uplifting. And then on Cambria's note, I actually really enjoyed that the women's team, it wasn't the women's team, but it was. They won the debate. And not only did they win the debate, but they flipped the audience poll. So they actually flipped everyone's views and then won the debate. And I really enjoyed that.
It was fantastic, wasn't it? Thank you so much. Aid, how about you?
Yeah, I would take with the room reception. Always a nice time, to engage with others and to do the networking. And also to finally meet Michael, who leads our PRI Listed Equities Committee in person. For more than 1 year, we've been doing Zooms, so always a pleasure to meet in person.
Amazing. And it's just been such a great opportunity for people to meet in person, but also for us to come to you live and bring you the most fantastic speakers. I mean, we have had the best time in the live studio, the most amazing guests. And so finally, just to thank all of you, Barb, Cambria, Lindsay, Abe, thank you so much for coming and sharing those highlights. They were all fantastic. So this brings us to the end of our time in the studio, but we have had an absolute blast and it's been great hosting you virtually. However, PRI in person is not finished yet. We will take a 45-minute break and be back from the plenary with two fascinating panel discussions. Can you invest responsibly in AI? And centering nature in responsible investment approaches. And just another reminder that all the content across PRI in person 2024 has been recorded. So we do encourage you to go back and watch what you've missed on demand. Finally, PRI's CEO David Atkin will close the conference, and he's going to highlight what you can expect from PRI in person 2025, so you really won't want to miss that. So I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us in the studio virtually, and I hope you enjoy the rest of PRI in person 2024.